Hello, my name is Chuck Wolfe. Over the years, I've worked in many different roles, including leading my own leadership consulting company since 1994. I've worked for and with some of the best companies and universities in the world, and have had the opportunity to work with government officials, military organizations, and public and private schools. I'm a leading expert and pioneer in emotional intelligence. Since 2009, I've been a volunteer hosting a radio show I created called The Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. I really enjoy making a difference in people's lives. The show is on award-winning community radio station, WPKN in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In recent years, Simsbury Community Television has been sharing my shows on their station and on YouTube. My sincere hope is that everyone who watches regularly will learn how to use the Emotion Roadmap in their own lives by listening to people who call in to get help with challenges at work, home, and in communities. To learn more, go to www.emotionroadmap.com. If you have a comment or question, email me at cjwolfe@cjwolfe.com. Thank you and enjoy the show.
And this is Chuck Wolfe. You're listening to the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. I want to thank everybody that's listening today. That's a regular listener. Thanks for tuning in. If you're new to the show, I'll spend a few minutes telling you a little bit about the show. It's the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. It's the show designed to help our community to understand that you can have more control over your emotions, perhaps than you ever knew that you could control. So often I think people are thinking about emotions, and they're thinking about the fact that whatever I'm feeling, it's like that's the hand I was dealt and I have to play these cards. And the truth is that while emotions are always interesting and informative and useful, they're not always helpful. And so the emotions we feel at a particular point in time sometimes are counterproductive to what it is we're trying to get done. So the show is all about helping you deal with emotions that are challenging and maybe in the way at times of you being successful with whatever you're setting out to do. It also helps you to get unstuck. The show is designed to help really smart people, good critical thinkers, excellent problem solvers understand that emotions sometimes cloud issues and make it hard to problem solve, hard to engage in critical thinking. So the key is often to try to understand what emotions are in play if I'm stuck. I find with smart people who are stuck, it's almost always something emotional that's happening either inside them or perhaps in somebody that they're dealing with. They're concerned about something they're about to say or do in terms of how it's going to make someone else that's important to them, how it's going to make that person feel. Now, sometimes it's somebody you really care about, somebody you love, perhaps somebody, a family member that you're worried about doing something that's going to be upsetting to them. Other times it's somebody maybe that you don't even like, but perhaps you have to work with. But they're important to your career, they're important to your ability to get things done, and you don't want to perhaps make them angry. And so you're really worried because you're going to have to tell them something that they're not going to like. And sometimes people shoot the messengers, right? So how do you engage in these kinds of things? By being smarter about dealing with your own emotions and being smarter about how you influence other people's emotions. How do you do it? And one of the ways that I've discovered over the years of working in the field of emotional intelligence that we help people is by introducing this concept of an emotion roadmap. And again, all of you who listen regularly, I hope that you're finding lots of ways to use this idea of an emotion roadmap in your personal life, your professional life, in your communities, with your neighbors, with your loved ones, with the people that you work with, wherever you have anything going on and you have some strong, challenging emotions to deal with, thinking about the emotion roadmap and using it effectively, I hope that's the gift that you've received over the years that you've been listening to the show. This is my 14th year I've been doing this show, 14 and a half. It's a long time to be doing a radio show. When I first started, I thought I might do a year or two. I thought it'd be fun, thought it'd be interesting, and now I'm in my 14th year, and it's been fun, it's been interesting, and most importantly, I think it's been helpful to a lot of people. Lots of times people will call in and just share some really nice feedback that they've been regular listeners over the years and they really enjoy the show and they value the kinds of things that I bring to the radio when I come on the air the first and second Wednesdays of each month from 12 to 1 p.m. It's part of our community strip, part of trying to give back to the community in a way that is sort of specialized by each of the different hosts that are on at different times during the week, over the month. And I'm on the air twice a month, so I'm on the first and second Wednesdays of the month. And again, if you are a regular listener, you've been waiting to talk to me about something going on in your life, something to do with your family, something to do with your neighborhood, something to do with the country, the state, your city, your town. Last time I was on, I was actually helping somebody with an issue that she had in her town where there was some issue about where they're going to be building. And there was a problem with what she thought was going to happen to the value of the properties where the new building structure was going. And also, it could be very damaging to the environment, she felt. And she had some experts who agreed with her. And the people in the town, for whatever reason, they weren't interested in hearing from her. So I ended up talking about that. Emotionally, how do you get town managers or selectmen or mayors or whoever it is that's in charge of your particular town or city to listen, to pay attention when you think you have something really important they need to attend to before they just move on with their plans? That was an unusual one for me to talk about, but we did, and the woman felt really helpful. By the way, in case you're listening today and you want to call in and see how any of that went, it's always nice to hear on occasion how some of the ideas we talk about with listeners who call in, whether the actual emotional plans that we put in place together actually turn out. On the rare occasion I had somebody call back, they usually turn out pretty good. Sometimes, though, they just kind of, they don't move the needle. They might help a little, but they don't necessarily make the changes that you were looking for. You can continue the conversations then. The number to call, if you've been waiting to talk to me and you want to call today, is 203-336-9756. 203-336-9756. Now, again, I'm on the air from 12 to actually 5 minutes to 1. And so I have about 50 minutes right now to talk with you. And usually when somebody calls in, the talk usually runs about 10, 15 minutes. Sometimes a little longer, sometimes shorter, but somewhere around 10, 15 minutes. And I can help you. So this is a good time to call if you've got something rather than wait. Sometimes people wait. They hear somebody else call. They hear the other person get some help and they feel like, I think I'm going to call. And then it's close to the end of the hour and I can't help you because I only do this on the air as a volunteer. I do this for a living. In some ways, I do a lot of executive coaching and as a professional. That's my business. But this is as a volunteer. And so I do it on the radio in part for two reasons. One is I love helping people. If I can help you, it makes me feel great. And second, I really like the idea that other people are learning while I help you. I've got our first caller. Hi, this is Chuck. You're on the air. Who am I talking to, please?
This is Rich from Brookhaven.
Rich, did you say?
Yeah, that's me.
Hi, Rich. Did you call before one time before?
I might have called about 3-4 years ago. Hasn't been that recently, but yes, I have called before.
Okay, well, yes, your voice sounds familiar. That's why I don't remember the exact phone call, but I do remember talking to you. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I just am calling for some suggestions on something that I think is a very current problem.
Okay.
And a very challenging problem. And I'm not sure if there's any answer to it. It may not be. I guess you can say I'm on the political left.
Okay.
By the American standards, like Bernie Sanders or AOC or something like that, which in the rest of the developed world would be considered ultra-conservative, but American politics are, by definition, usually tilted towards the right. But all that being said, and I'm a very much believer in Dr. King's approach for social change and Gandhi's, in other words, that nonviolence is the way to go. And when you make changes to nonviolence, that you have the least unintended consequences, you don't have a lot of things. In other words, it ends up being the changes tend to stick, and they're for the better, and so forth. At least that's my reading of history.
Okay.
So anyway, so I still work full time. I'm close to 70. I have a family and all of that. And I also, in my spare time, which sometimes I don't have, I make the time to do it. I'm an activist as far as in peace and social justice types of activities here on Long Island. And so there's been a lot of, in the past couple of years, pushback as far as that's concerned from very well-funded groups on the other side. And somebody who I know pretty closely was almost killed in public by a group. Now, I'm not saying it was necessarily a group of people, but it was a bunch of very right-wing people. And this was in a town on Long Island, and she was surrounded by like 300 people who were screaming in her face, and she couldn't get out from there, and she was fearful that she would get ripped limb from limb. And this person's a very courageous person, very smart, very sophisticated and like that, and not somebody without courage. And it ended up that the people doing it were very sophisticated too, like they had been well trained. In other words, don't touch the person, but maybe scream at 300 people screaming in somebody's face, a quarter inch away from their face and like that. But to just do things that nobody can say, you touched you understand what I'm saying? The people are not stupid as far as that goes.
Okay.
And so like at certain times we'll have different demonstrations, maybe in favor of immigrants, like we'll carry signs saying America was built by immigrants, which is to me kind of hard to argue with. Maybe things against assault weapons, maybe things that are pro-choice and things like that.
Uh-huh.
And so it's been kind of ramping up over time that you'll have people. Now, the police has deliberately separated the two of us. So the thing that is a concern is it just keeps getting, I know years ago I was doing similar things for Planned Parenthood, and that got, kind of hairy after a while, that the other side would come there with masonry buckets full of blood, not human, but, from a slaughterhouse or whatever, and just throw it on the street close to where you were standing. The other side would broadcast your name, your address, the name of your pets. They don't want anything to happen to your pets. Where you live, the age of your children, and things like that. So I'm figuring, well, that happened back then, and they turned out to be empty threats, and nothing happened. But it's still, a little unnerving as far as that goes. So I'm just getting a little concerned. And also when the police come between us and the folks on the other side, they tend to hang out with the people on the other side. And I've heard some right-wing organizations like to recruit people who are ex-police officers or who are ex-military. And this way, if the police are going to do something, they'll say, well, I was in this 18th precinct or I was in this Marine division or something like that trying to do it. So it's the people on the other side are definitely very well organized and not stupid. And the part that concerns me is I've watched the movie 1972 Cabaret with Liza Minnelli and Joel Grey and like that, showing
Rich, I got to ask you, you got to get to a point here where you're asking me something. Otherwise,
okay, all right. Well, all right. No. Okay. My point is this: where do I develop a steely spine as far as not letting the intimidation, and maybe if, let's say, somebody from that group does what they did at the Planned Parenthood things years ago, is follow you back to your car, tell you, where you live, tell you the name of your children, and how they don't want anything to happen to them. So how do I respond to that?
So, okay. So you made a lot of points about the other side, right? Mm-hmm. And this isn't a political show. So for everybody that's listening that feels like, but what about Maxine Waters in your face? What about the people outside the Supreme Court Justice's house? What about, so there's a lot that goes on both sides. And the question you have, which is just simply about how do I have more of a steely spine? I don't think it's about a steely spine. I think it's about the recognition of a fear factor that when you do these things, yes, you are being courageous and you are standing up for what you believe is right and true. And that's the beauty of our country. But that doesn't mean that there aren't crazy people, or not even crazy people, but just people who are so determined to have what they believe to be right and true, to be the law of the land, that they're willing to do things that are disgusting and wrong and harmful. And so I don't think it's about a steely spine. I think it's about, a recognition that there's a fear factor that's legitimate. And and that emotion that you're feeling is a warning signal that's saying maybe you went, farther than you want to go at this point in this place at this time. Wait, let me finish. Aristotle said, there's a time to be angry in the right way, with the right people and for the right reasons. But anger is something you really want to avoid if you can. When you're protesting the things that you want to stand up for and be proud that you're doing it, you put yourself in harm's way to a degree, and you know that. And I think it's a legitimate fear factor. If they're saying things like, I know where your kids live and I know things like that, I mean, that's, you look at why people didn't react when the Nazis came, right? Well, because they were terrified that if they tried to save somebody who they might have cared a lot about, but they worried about their own kids, and they were, and that's that saying that you probably heard this. I know you're a smart guy. I've talked with you before, and I remember. I just think it's like,
thank you.
Yeah. Somebody says, at some point they're going to come for this other group, and then they're going to come for this other group, and then they're coming for us. So at some point you do want to stand up, but you also got to recognize, Rich, that there's a legitimate fear factor that's warning you that maybe at this point, in this place, at this time, you don't want to be the voice that people recognize.
Well, the thing that I think that's true, and that is something I do feel is a fear factor and like that. The thing about it that scares me, though, is like could be at the next school board meeting or something like that. You have 100 people who don't live in the district, yelling and whatever, saying, all these books are pornography, or, we need to be able to vote on which teachers teach our kids and whatever kind of thing and like that. And looking to be that the loudest group takes over, but with intimidation over the majority. And I think that's moving towards I don't think I'm being alarmist. I think that's right in my face as far as looking to be an authoritarian, situation. And I find that to be frightening. I mean, I'm an old timer, so maybe I got another 5 years left, something like that. But for my children and grandchildren,
I get it. Yeah, I get it. Rich, I don't. The answer isn't to switch feelings here. The answer is to recognize what your feelings are telling you and make some decisions, thoughtful decisions based on what your experience is. You're not going to change the country because you're at a particular protest, but but you do want to find ways where your influence and your voice and your message is heard and valued and appreciated. And by the way, again, I have friends who think very differently than you, who feel quite the same about the side that you're on. So I that's why I don't really want to engage in politics so much as I do want to talk about the emotional stuff underpinning it, though. And then I do think that there were moments in my life where I stood up and I felt like I was in an unsafe place, but I thought it was important enough for my voice to be heard, and I took that risk. I did do that. But there were other times when I thought, I'd like for my voice to be heard, but I think it's just too risky. I don't want to do it right here at this time.
Well, I think that to me, the biggest tragedy of it, and I realized this a long time ago and like that, is I think that you mentioned the people on the other side, and I agree. I think that they might be looking at us maybe the way we might, look at them based on not on our feelings, but on their actions. And so, the bottom line to me is you got two, quote unquote, ordinary people that are all pink on the inside and fighting amongst themselves, whereas the politicians, the big shots, the corporations love the ordinary people fighting amongst themselves because next they can screw all of them equally. And that, to me, that's the biggest tragedy.
Well, there is and that's something else that I protest against because I'm a huge fan of capitalism, but I hate greed. But I really hate greed,
Yeah.
and greed shows up a lot. And that's what people don't like about capitalism is when somebody who's sitting in an office somewhere lays off 100,000 people because their company's that big, and they get millions and millions of dollars in bonuses because of it. So and sometimes it's legitimate. I don't even mean to say that that's not legitimate, but a lot of times it feels wrong to me the way it's done. So.
Okay. Well, you gave me some good things to think about, and
Good.
I think that's very good, and I appreciate it.
Nice to talk to you, Rich.
All right. Well,
Okay.
keep up the good work.
Thanks
Take
a lot.
care.
Bye now.
Bye.
Okay, well, again, sometimes we'll end up talking about politics. Not always, but once in a while, that's what happens. Let's see if I can shut this off here. There we go. So if you want to call in and you got something else you'd like to talk about, the number is 203-336-9756. 203-336-9756. So something else I wanted to talk about today is this whole idea of July 4th, right? We just had a celebration for July 4th. I don't know if you saw fireworks. It's really interesting, right? I mean, again, some of the dynamics that Rich was talking about, play out in all kinds of different ways. Like now we have part of climate concern is about whether we should have fireworks demonstrations. And I won't get into the science of it because I don't know that I understand the science that well, but I was reading about it, and I just know it becomes an issue now, and they're trying to figure out other ways that they might have spectacles or some way of celebrating the birth of our nation. And of course, there's it's hard not to think about the politics, right? Because we just had some Supreme Court rulings that made some people very happy and a whole bunch of other people unhappy. So it's challenging to be a patriot and to be in America and to feel like sometimes our voices aren't really heard and we want them to be heard. I think the good news, perhaps, is that we can say what we want, hopefully without fear, but sometimes it is fearful because other people feel so strongly that in a different way than what we might believe at any point in time. But I do think you do want to stand up and be courageous and say what needs to be said and do it in a way that is helpful to the dialogue. I know, just it reminds me sometimes when people call in and they have, politics on the mind, I encourage people to look at Braver Angels as an organization, as a way of helping you understand both the other point of view and also to perhaps understand how to communicate your point of view more effectively. Braver Angels has this, I like to say, one of the co-founders is a family therapist, marriage therapist, who takes techniques that he uses in marital therapy to bring together people who have extremely different views. He calls them red and blue. Recognizing in politics, we think of red states and blue states, red being very conservative, blue being very liberal or progressive. And the whole idea of this conversation that they generate is they start off with techniques like, okay, if you're like Rich, very progressive in the AOC, Bernie Sanders camp, you probably have some thoughts about how people who are very conservative or right-wing might feel about your group. What do you think they say about your group when asked? And what do you think they believe you say about their group when asked? And it just, without any conversation other than what's in your own head, you're asked to kind of think about both sides of the argument from your own frame of reference. And later on, after several other kinds of exercises where you've really stepped back and really thought about not only how I feel and how to make people understand why I feel the way I do, because it's so important to me, but how does somebody else feel who feels just as strongly as me, but it seems to be totally opposite? How do they feel and why? And while Braver Angels doesn't pretend that they can create friendships from these kinds of conversations where they bring people together and from different points of view, but they are really gifted in helping people understand different points of views in ways that they hadn't before, and to be much more accepting and understanding. When we talk about diversity, inclusion, equity, and social justice, we usually think about certain types of people in certain groupings. But what if we think about everybody who has a different opinion than us as embracing that type of diversity? I actually struggle a bit with the idea of safe spaces. I think safe spaces are important, and I understand the need for them, but somewhere they got overused, in my mind anyway, with the idea that we want strong, powerful arguments for all kinds of points of views to challenge the way we think. That's, to me, what universities and colleges were about, for me anyway, was to go in and challenge the way I was raised and what I was brought up believing. Not to say that was wrong, but just to make me think really hard about why I believe what I believe, and also about what other people believe that might be different than what I grew up understanding and being taught, and why it's okay to have different points of view, and why we all need to live together even though we might very strongly disagree. And yet, can we be respectful of one another and inclusive of one another? Now, I know those terms aren't used that way normally, but they could be, and in my mind, probably should be. I don't like to demonize any group. You know, I find myself at times very much part of one group at times, and then other times a part of another group. I don't, you know, for a while, when I was growing up, I was raised in a particular political party, and that was the only party. And according to my parents, that's what I was taught when I was growing up. And then I began to say, you know, I don't know. I mean, there's some people over there in that other party I really like, and some people in this party that is my party I'm not so crazy about. So I stopped being really a party person and became very much focused on who people are. If you want less, by the way, if you want less fundamentally divisive people in either party, then probably you should get active in the primaries that are coming up and vote for somebody you believe represents you. If you want somebody that's somewhere more, whatever you might call it, central, moderate, less extreme. Because a lot of times the actual person that gets picked to run in a party comes out of the primary with the most dedicated, most strongly willed people who believe in their party go to vote. Most people don't vote till the general election shows up. But you only get to vote on the candidates that the party picks at that point. If you vote in the primary, you get to influence who you'll be voting for in the general election. Just something to think about. Okay, enough about politics. I would like to talk a little bit about just some other things that are happening in the world in the sense of what it means to be independent. You know, I still watch shows about our founding fathers and the things that happened. And I realize we're rethinking so many things these days. You know, our founding fathers, anyone that happened to be a slave owner, you know, did they have any redeeming features if they were a slave owner? Some people think not. Other people think, you know what, you got to kind of look at the times. Well, you can say that about lots of things that happened over the years, over multiple generations, over thousands of years, how we evolved and what things were like way back when. And yeah, there's something to that. Obviously, people wouldn't argue the point. At the same time, it seems just wrong, right? You look back at certain things, they just seem wrong. But so many things have been wrong, you know, in terms of all the horrific things that have happened over the course of empire building, whether it was Rome or England or Spain or the Netherlands or whatever country might have been dominant. In our case, a lot of people now look at America as being somebody that tried to colonize the world, maybe not so openly. And I don't know that I believe that, but I do believe that we've done lots of things that, frankly, are not very pleasant to think about when you think about our own country. Yet at the same time, I'm proud of a lot of things this country has done too. It's not an open and shut book about you should or shouldn't be, thinking really positively about the country. It's like all of us as individuals, just like each country, we all got strengths, we all got weaknesses. We all have some development opportunities, and we all have some things that aren't changing about us, that aren't great. We all do. But how do we work to be the best possible versions of ourselves? How do we work for our country to be the best possible version of our country? That's what Rich was talking about, being willing to stand up and trying not to be afraid when some things are very scary about how things are happening. So I think that I don't think we should be in each other's faces. I don't think we should be threatening each other. But I do think we should be talking to each other about why we might have a different point of view. I think that's important. And what about being independent? What does it mean for you to be independent? Sometimes independence is a young man or woman, or someone else who chooses something different than being a man or woman, who is grown up in their parents' household, his parents' household, her parents' household, and it's just time to leave. It's time to go out on your own. It's time to be independent of your family and to make your stand in the world and to find a way to get that done while being the best possible version of yourself. There's times when relationships stop working and people know they haven't worked in a long time, and they are probably better served if they're independent of each other. But how do you know when that's happened? How do you know when your relationship isn't really what you want it to be? I think being independent of another person in a relationship sometimes is not the best choice. I think that relationships with partners are really special, and they have their ups and downs. Every relationship does, and when they're down, I like to think about this, and I'll mention this. I've said this many years ago. I think when you fall in love with somebody and you want to be with that person forever, you feel like it is forever when you make the agreement in whatever kind of ceremony where you become, if you will, married or partnered, however you describe it, and you commit to each other forever. But forever is a long time sometimes for folks, right? And sometimes you feel like, I don't know if I can keep working this hard to keep this relationship together. I might just be better off without this other person. Certainly, lots of people have those thoughts at different times. And yet some stay together and some don't. And while I think it's really important in certain instances that people don't stay together, I really do think there are times when that's the right decision. But I also think that sometimes people give up too soon, too easily. The one thing about failure in terms of a relationship is you've never really failed until you just quit trying and it hasn't worked and you give up. But as long as you're trying, as long as you keep working at it, as long as you're willing to listen and to be accountable to yourself and not assume that somebody else is at fault, as long as that's going on and you're willing to say, look, whatever's happening here, I want it to stop. I care too much about you as a person to not want to be with you. I realize it's possible that we could be apart, and that's a distinct possibility based on where we are at the moment. But I want to work as hard as I can, be the best possible version of me for you so that you want to stay. And I hope you want to be the best possible version of you so I want to stay. So I encourage you to think about independence in different ways. One is independence in a relationship when it really is over and it's the best thing. Try to do it amicably if you're going to separate from someone that you've been with, that you thought you were going to be with forever. Sometimes that's real hard to do. Especially if there's children involved, though, it's really important to try to have some kind of relationship so you don't put the kids in the middle and ask the kids to choose between you. I don't know anything that's tougher than that for a young kid. Even for an older kid, but I think as we're older, we have a little bit better chance of making it work okay. But as a young kid, it's really hard. So do what you can to make it work as best you can, even if you are choosing to be independent. But one of the things that I've encouraged people when they're about to get married or think about getting married is not to ask people, do you love this other person? Instead, I ask, do you adore this other person? Because adore and love for me carry different meanings. Adore you doesn't mean I put you on a pedestal. Adore you means that I'll be forgiving of almost anything because you are one of the most special people I've ever met in my life, and I want you in my life forever, and I adore you. And so adore for me is stronger than love. I don't know why. I just, in terms of the scales of intensity, if I adore somebody, it's at another level. That means that you can do something that's awful, and I'm still going to adore you. I might be really mad at you, but I'm still going to adore you. It's going to be hard to knock that down. But love seems more transient, just more common. We say it more openly. How often have you ever said to anybody, I adore you, versus how many times you might have told somebody you love them? So for me, do you adore somebody? If you adore somebody, I wouldn't give up. I'd keep working at the relationship. I'd make it work. I'd find a way, not to change them, by the way, but to change me so they wanted to be with me. I'd do whatever I thought was going to make me still who I am. I don't mean change who I am, but just be the best possible version of me, that whatever attracted them in the first place, to be the best possible version of me whenever I'm with them, as often as I can. So I encourage you to think like that a little bit about it, about relationships. So anyway, again, if you'd like to call, the number is 203-336-9756. You're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM. I'm Chuck Wolfe. This is the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. Take the wheel. When you're not sure how you want to feel, take the wheel, decide how you want to feel, and drive there. Drive to where you want to feel. Things you might want to call and talk about is something going on at work, at home, in your community, neighborhood, groups you belong to. Maybe you're a member of a band, a sports team, a religious organization, wherever you might have some things that are causing you some kind of concern and you're uncertain how to proceed. That's grist for the mill for this show, because hopefully I can walk you through the emotion roadmap, which I didn't really get to explain. But the idea of the emotion roadmap is you have a situation that you're not sure how to proceed. You're kind of uncertain. You're sort of stuck, maybe confused a bit, and maybe very worried about something that you need to do that might escalate a situation instead of making that better. Whatever it might be, I ask you to tell me a little bit about it, and then I walk you through these series of questions. How are you feeling right now about it? If there's someone else involved, by the way, sometimes it's just internal. You might just have something going on inside you and it's just you. But often it's with somebody else as well. So how is he or she or they feeling? Whoever's key, how is he or she or they feeling? And then I look at the feelings and say, so are the feelings helpful to what you're trying to get done? Often they're not when you're struggling. And so I'll ask you, well, if you could make magic happen, what would you like to feel about this particular situation? What do you want to feel? And for anyone, again, that's key, what would you want him or her or them to feel? And then, like any roadmap that says, here's one point and we're trying to get to another point, we start to map it out. And again, this is a very simple one, but let's assume that maybe you're anxious and want to feel confident. How do we, or does anyone, get from feeling anxious to feeling confident? How does it work? How do emotions work? So I talked to you a little bit about that. And then I ask you, have you ever been anxious before? Circumstances totally different. I get it. I'm not asking you whether you've ever had the same situation, but chances are you may have had the feelings, similar feelings around other situations sometime in your past, maybe recent, maybe a long time ago. Have you ever felt anxious and found yourself feeling confident? Was there something that you might have done in a different circumstance, in a different time, where it cues you to the concept that there are things that you've done in the past that have alleviated the anxiety and turned it into confidence? And when I find something that may have worked for you sometime in the past, and you feel as though you learn, one, that you're capable of doing something like moving from anxious to confident, and you remind yourself this isn't some expert telling you what you should do. This is you telling yourself that, hey, wait a minute, I did something like this before. Not the same circumstance, but the same feelings. So I can probably do something maybe again. You start to believe in yourself at that point. And then if it's something that you can, it's a plan that sort of worked in the past that might work here, I try to help you build on that. But I'm building on your plan then. Not mine, but yours, helping you build your plan. And then by the time we're through, we're asking, okay, of the things we talked about, is there anything you really can do to feel less anxious, more confident? That we talked about that feels like you're willing to do it. Sometimes you might have a good plan, but for some reason, attitudinally, you're not willing to do it. Secondly, you might have a willingness to do it, but you may not have the ability to do it. You might be lacking in the competency you need. You might need time that you don't have. Maybe something costs money and you don't have the money available to you for this purpose at this time. So there might be reasons why you can't do it. And then that's not really a plan. But when you can say, yes, I'm willing and yes, I'm able, and you're feeling good about it and you want to go for it, that's how it works. That's the emotion roadmap in a nutshell, if you will. Okay, so let me help somebody help themselves by you calling in, and then everybody that's listening hopefully learns a little bit about it too and learns how to do it for themselves. And just like with Rich, I mean, if you heard me talking to Rich, it was like he was saying he thought he wanted to change his feelings so he had more courage. I don't think so. Not for the circumstance he talked about. I think the fear factor is how you're feeling, how you want to feel. Well, it's not really how he wants to feel, but is it the appropriate feeling for what he needs to pay attention to in those circumstances? Yeah, it is. If somebody's threatening you in your family, do you really want to be in that spot at that time with these people? I'm not so sure. Sometimes it's worth it, but lots of times something like that, you want to pick a different spot. You can still influence the circumstance and the situation that he was talking about trying to influence without being in a crowd of people that are looking pretty upset and mean. So I think, part of this, again, is trying to understand and be smart about emotions, whether they're the right emotions at the right time, or do you want to change them? And if you want to change them, what do you change them to? Okay. 203-336-9756. 203-336-9756. Well, I've given you a minute, and I'll repeat the number one more time, and then I've got a couple of I think interesting stories to tell you that I think that you'll enjoy hearing about. But first, again, 203-336-9756. Okay, so let me just share with you something I'm very proud of, actually. I've been on the air at different times talking about some of the things that I've experienced in my life where I've had really wonderful opportunities to learn from brilliant people. And hopefully I've justified them taking the time to teach me some of the things that I learned from them. And one of the things that I learned in recent times was that I could blend some of the things that I've learned in a very creative way. Creativity comes in a number of different forms. When you think of somebody that's creative, you think, somebody created something that never heard of before. That's brand new. That's unbelievable. And maybe in the field of artificial intelligence, that whole concept, is very creative. But people didn't just come up with artificial intelligence, right? It was a series of things where people combined things that were already learned together in unique ways to also be creative. So sometimes creativity is something that's brand new, never been done or thought of before. That's pretty unusual. That's pretty unusual. Could happen, but that's unusual. On the other hand, the idea of something where you take things that exist, ideas that exist, tools that exist, mechanical inventions that exist, and you put them together in a very unique way. That's also a form of creativity. So one of the things that I did with the Emotion Roadmap was create a concept that was built around a number of other theories that I'd learned about in the past. So, for example, I've been trained to help organizations and individuals create change, positive change, transformational change, transactional change, small changes, large changes. And I've been trained in that in many different ways. I worked at Harvard Business School as a research associate in organizational behavior, where I learned a lot about organizational change. I was trained as a counselor at Northeastern University and then had a lot of experiences where I taught counseling. I was in lots of different kinds of workshops over the years on group dynamics, group therapy, family therapy, family systems therapy, parent education, parent effectiveness, lots of different learnings over the years. And I put things together around change with the idea that change starts with, where are we today? What is the status quo, what people will call current state? And then for transformational change, I'm looking at something that's magnificent on the other end. I don't want to be in this current state anymore. I want to be at this future state, which is fantastic. Just amazing vision of the future of what I want to be. Well, the Emotion Roadmap asks you, what are you feeling? Current state, what would be ideal to feel? A compelling vision of the future of how you want to feel. So the Emotion Roadmap combines change management. There's something called appreciative inquiry, which is this idea that, hey, people like using their strengths. That will probably sound familiar to you. You think about the things you're good at. Don't you like doing the things you're good at in different ways? If you are a tinkerer and like to take things apart, when you're a kid growing up, you were taking apart transistor radios or little machines, train engines, or whatever it might be that you were playing with, and you took it apart and put it back together, and you really enjoy that. Chances are you're still doing some things along those lines where you're still building or putting things together in innovative ways and or helping others with some of the things that need to be done in their household. And you enjoy it because you're good at it. So strengths. How do you leverage strengths? How do we build on strengths? How do we keep people in the workplace engaged? Well, one of the things you can do to keep them engaged is find things they're good at and keep giving them more and more of it, especially if you can give them things that are new to them but capitalize on the strengths they already have. That's a development opportunity, right? So one of the things that I do is I try to find ways to build on strengths, and there's a theory called appreciative inquiry. And a part of appreciative inquiry is asking somebody, hey, if you've got this challenging project in front of you and you're concerned about it and you're worried about it, let's talk about other projects you've done. Let's see if we can find some ways where there's some things perhaps that you may have done in the past that would lend themselves for you to feel pretty good about your ability to actually get this new project done. So the appreciative inquiry part of the Emotion Roadmap is this idea of there's a strength and you understanding that there was a time when you were anxious once before, maybe many times actually, and you turned that into confidence. Because if you recognize that you have that strength that built from the past, from being anxious before to confident now, you can use some of what you learned there about yourself and about what you did to help you now. So that's using strengths. That's making somebody's plan their plan. Maybe it's going to change some, and I help them with helping them shape it, but it's still their plan, and it's so much more powerful than me just saying, hey, listen, you want me to tell you what to do? Here's what you do. I mean, that could work too, potentially, if I've got a good plan for you and you just follow it lockstep. But you don't feel the same way about it as if it's something that you already did yourself, and this is just to build on that. So that's appreciative inquiry. And then, of course, it's problem solving. It's trying to understand, problem solving, the idea of problem solving. A really good problem solver looks for root causes, looks for what it is that causes you to feel the way you're feeling. And then when you want to feel something different, it looks for what would be the root that we need to change in order to get you to feel the way we want you to feel. And so problem-solving methodology is part of the emotion roadmap too. I call it emotion-based problem solving. If how you're feeling isn't helpful to what you want to get done, what would be ideal to feel and how do we get there? Essentially, that's it. That's the problem-solving part. So that's included with the emotion roadmap as well. And then, of course, there's emotional intelligence, which is this idea that incorporated in the emotion roadmap is this idea that most people actually don't know. And you may have heard me say this before, but I'll say it now. What we are feeling influences what we think and what we do. So as an example, if I have a keynote presentation, someone's hired me to come in and be highly motivational to several thousand people in an auditorium and maybe several thousand people listening online, right? They want me to be inspirational. And I was already set to go and had a great speech, knew what was going to be motivational to them, knew how to engage them, knew exactly what they were going to feel when I said certain things. And I was ready. And then I hear, before I go on, maybe 15 minutes or so before I go on, somebody I know was in an accident. And it was not a good accident. It was something real. We don't know how bad, but it was bad. And now I'm feeling that right before I go on the stage to speak. So how do you handle an emotion that isn't right? It's real, though. It's right for what you just heard, but it's not helpful to what you got to get done. Can you compartmentalize it? Can you put it sort of in a box in your head somehow for the time being, knowing that you're going to have to deal with this, but in the next half hour or 45 minutes, hour and a half, whatever the keynote is, you're going to be everything the people in front of you in that room and online need. Can you do that? Are you capable of doing that? Because again, that's another part of understanding how to put emotional intelligence, the concept, the theory behind emotional intelligence that says that how we feel drives what we think and do. When we recognize that and we recognize that the feeling we want is not the feeling we need for what we're about to do, can we change it? And that's part of the emotion roadmap. So it has change management, it has appreciative inquiry, building on strengths. It has this idea of emotional intelligence, how emotions work, and it has problem-solving methodology, all embedded in 4 simple questions. How are you feeling? What would be ideal to feel? And how do you get from what is your current state or your current feeling to what would be ideal? How do we do it? And are you able and willing? If you are able and willing to exercise a strategy we just discussed together, you have an emotion-based plan that has a good chance of working for you. So I hope with that explanation that you found this is a valuable opportunity to think about what's happening in your life. Where are you stuck? What are the circumstances maybe that are challenging you? How do you be independent of all the constraints that hold you back from being the best possible version of you? Years ago, a fellow named Kurt Lewin talked about a force field analysis. It's another model I've kept with me all my life. I think is really important to understand. There's always, he said, forces holding you back or your organization back or whatever you're talking about back, and forces pushing you forward. Another way of thinking about being independent is how do you gain traction for the forces pushing you forward to be the best possible version of you, and how do you lower the resistance of the forces holding you back? Food for thought on this holiday, not day, but holiday week, because I noticed today as I was traveling from Boston, I was in Boston yesterday. We went to the Red Sox game, which was sad, not a happy game. But we had a hotel room with a view of the Charles River, and we got to see the fireworks over the Esplanade. We also had a lovely day with some friends who came to the game with us and went out for a real treat at a restaurant called Buttermilk and Bourbon. which is not a typical Boston restaurant. A lot of New Orleans cuisine on the corner of Dartmouth and Comm Ave, in case you're in the Boston area looking for something different. At least different to me. We're not usually eating the foods we ate there the other night, but it's fun, lots of fun, and it's fun being in the city, and really thankful that we had that room that we were able to see the fireworks going off at 10:30 at night from a hotel window, and you could hear them. We're close enough, you could hear them, so it was pretty cool. So I'm celebrating this country. I know it's got a lot of, problems, like all countries have problems. I know people like to think that capitalism and democracy are messy, ugly affairs, but they seem to be better than the other messy, ugly affairs in other countries and other places. And that's why so many people want to come into our country and live here. I think if you've had that experience of living in other countries, when I've talked to my friends who are immigrants from other places, they're thrilled to be here. When I talk to people who have been here for a long time, I know that sometimes they find the challenges here to be very upsetting. And so, while we haven't solved all our problems, I hope that y'all believe we're capable of solving our problems. We've had tough problems in the past. We've solved them before. So if you focus on the appreciative inquiry, we have abilities here that we can use. Like Rich said, thanks for the phone call, Rich, by the way. But like Rich said, I've got this kind of point of view, and I'm afraid sometimes when I speak about that point of view. Don't let people... Don't be those scary other people, whatever side you're on. Allow people to have their say. Try to understand why people might feel differently, and be really respectful of diversity, inclusion, equity, and social justice. And I wish you all a wonderful holiday going forward, or holiday week, and I'll be back with you next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.